We're glad to have you back. Well, the Nigerian Labour Congress is lamenting on the federal government's announcement of a new price regime following President Bola Timubu's declaration of putting an end to fuel subsidy payments. However, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, the Nigerian Chamber of Commerce, Industry, Mines and Agriculture, and the Center for the Promotion for Private Enterprise says the president's move to remove subsidy is the right direction, a step in the right direction. Now, let's take a look at some of the contending economic and social issues around this recent development of subsidy removal. And I introduced him earlier. He's a senior research and policy analyst. He's with Budget, Mr. Enebi Okpalua. Mr. Okpalua, thank you so much. Good afternoon. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me on your show. I'm glad to be here.
Yes. First, let's start up with what choices do we have really at this time, considering our debt level and, of course, all of the challenges we face as a country, say that we'll continue to pay subsidy at this time. Do you think that this move by the president, like all some have said, is a step in the right direction?
Okay, first, subsidy removal is a very sensitive issue, so I'll do my best to be as balanced and objective as possible. Now, I don't try to think of it as right or wrong. I basically look at it as what is necessary for the economy and how do you deliver or implement that policy. So let's look at it. Either way, subsidy is a double-edged sword. Either way you cut it, there are consequences. First of all, let's say you keep it. Last year, our subsidy was about 4.4 trillion. That's just between January and November. And then when you add that to the debt service bill for the same period, that was about 5.2 trillion, total of 9.5 trillion, compared to our total revenue from both oil and non-oil revenue. That was somewhere around, which was about 6.5 trillion. The debt service and subsidy bill exceeded total revenue by almost 50% thereabout. So obviously it has been strenuous on the economy. Between 2006 and now, the subsidy bill has risen almost 1,500%. So we can understand why the government has been lamenting that the subsidy, sustaining the subsidy has been a strain on the country's economy. Now imagine we had excess of 50% of our revenue. How did we pay salaries last year? How did we handle capital projects? So the implication is that last year Nigeria survived based on debt. Our revenue could not go anywhere. That is a big challenge, and obviously, based on that alone, you can say subsidy should go. So the issue is not whether it should go. The problem or the challenge is how it should go. And I think that is something that needs to be looked at deeply. Now, this now takes me to the other part of the double-edged sword, which is removing subsidies. If you look at the nature of our economy, by the time you remove subsidy, the first response will be transportation cost, which we can see everywhere. Cost of transportation has increased. But then by the time we look at our energy consumption, we have an estimated almost 20,000 megawatts in demand, whereas we have a national grid that delivers around 4,000 megawatts. So let's say 75% of the country's demand is obtained through self-generation. According to the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, between 8 to 14 gigawatts, that is 8,000 to 14,000 megawatts, is self-generated from petrol and diesel generators. That means families, houses, your refrigeration, and businesses, SMEs, they depend a lot on petrol and diesel generators, basically self-generation, to sustain businesses, to sustain livelihood and social life. Now, if you look at the SME sector, they make up a very good portion of our services sector. If we also stretch it beyond the SMEs and other services, you realize that a lot of people depend on energy to survive. The services sector accounts for more than 50% of the country's GDP. Now imagine an abrupt removal of petrol subsidy, which will have a direct implication of increasing cost of production for over 50% of the economy. Then I can now begin to understand the extent of inflationary pressures that may come along with that kind of approach to removing fuel subsidies. And I think that is where the sensitivities lie. It's not as if people do not understand that fuel subsidy should go. It is how it should go that is the issue. I believe the current administration has decided to take a rip the band-aid off approach to removing fuel subsidies and let's contend the issues. And perhaps that is where we are today. We are there already. It's no longer a matter of whether it should be removed. We have removed it. So what now we should be looking at is how we can make the best substitution. Perhaps if we can still implement some intervention measures that can ameliorate the impacts on the Nigerian citizen.
Well, some would say if we are to follow properly implementation of the Petroleum Industry Act, subsidy must go one way or the other. But like you identified, it's in two ways on all of that. But let's talk about the positives and the negatives of subsidy removal now. Some would tell you that, of course, it will help stop the drain on government. What about the pressure on FX is something that worries me, and also operational costs and market distortions that we might experience. Looking at these issues I've identified, how would you react to all of this, considering our situation?
Okay, like you said, there are positive and negative impacts of removing subsidy, which you've mentioned, in addition to the positive impacts such as reducing the pressure on forex. It also would, foster investment. So one of the reasons why we've heard that there are no investments in downstream sector, not the upstream now, downstream sector is because there have been subsidies. Now, with the likes of Dangote refineries and other upcoming refineries, I think there are fears regarding how they will make their revenues or profits have been removed. So people will be much more free to join the Nigerian downstream or invest in the Nigerian downstream sector. However, when looking at the negative impact, just like I mentioned earlier, we're looking at inflationary pressure on cost of almost everything. Cost of food will rise, energy prices will rise, transport logistic costs will rise. So basically every section of life, every section of the economy in the country will be affected by the removal of the petrol subsidy. There's hardly any sector that wouldn't feel it. So the issue now is how do we manage these developments?
Now, we're going to go to how we'll manage that now. But I want to also ask you, if the market is opened to private guys to play, that means the likes of the authority or the NDPRA would now start to open letters of credit for marketers to bring in products, right? If I'm correct. I think they should be able to start to import.
That is that is quite challenging for now. The NNPC is still the sole importer of petrol.
Exactly.
Yes, and I think for now, personally, it should remain the same, largely because of our exchange rate. Now, if we are implementing a new policy, I don't think we should go from 0 to 100 immediately. We should do it gradually. In fact, the way we've done it already, we've gone way far already. In my opinion, I would have suggested that we perhaps phase out subsidies over a certain period. This will reduce the strain on the country's revenues and then ensure that we have domestic refining capacity running effectively before we take it out completely. That should have been the approach. But right now, that is not the case. We've jumped the gun and we've gone as far as where we are today. Now, if we now decide to open the market for oil marketers to import petrol, they may likely not be doing that at the official rate because you have to get dollars to import. So they will have to probably seek dollars from the black market, and then that would significantly increase the cost of the petroleum that they would import into the country. Now in Lagos, the NPC has put a price peg of 488 naira per liter. For those who are importing to the black market, that will not be possible. Their prices would go high. Now we are trying to reduce fuel queues at petrol stations, right? If that happens, the queues will return because people would rather buy petrol at 488 in Lagos than probably 600 or 700 at other filling stations. So for now, I would say we don't do that. Before we take any more significant steps, we should take measures to ensure that there is domestic refining capacity running before we take additional. That is my perspective on the issue. We have removed it. We are where we are now, and we don't know how the discussions between the labor unions and the government will go. But for now, it stands removed. So I believe we should take it one step at a time, so as not to increase the negative effects it has on the economy and on the average Nigerian.
Well, many would say, is this the time to look away from PMS? Maybe we've gotten to that point where we have to diversify our energy sources, if you would agree with me. Though I don't know, do we have that capacity to totally take advantage of our gas reserves, both proven and unproven reserves that we have as a country? But do you think this is an opportunity to start looking away from fossil fuels?
Well, it's easier said than done. And petrol and gas are not exactly the same. They are not exactly substitutes, especially when you look at, they are not perfect substitutes when you look at the nature of their end use. Gas, at least in-country domestic use of gas, is largely used for cooking. The rest is used for power generation. You don't have gas-fired vehicles right now in Nigeria, so you cannot just switch. In terms of pursuing a gas mandate, yes, it is helpful to diversify the revenues of the country, increase revenues of Nigeria from gas. That would be very helpful. And in fact, that should be explored. If you look at the energy transition plan, gas is a major factor in Nigeria transitioning from fossil fuels to cleaner sources of energy. So yes, gas is good. But in terms of end use and consumers, gas would not be an alternative. You can't use gas to run your cars. You don't have any gas-powered vehicles right now. And if you look at the policies of the government, both at federal and state government levels, take for example Lagos State government, the shift is from petrol-powered vehicles to electric-powered vehicles. All right, not direct and gas engines. All right. So right now, I don't think there's a place to replace petrol or petrol uses with gas for now. That doesn't work. So they are not perfect substitute. But in terms of diversifying the revenue portfolio of the country, gas is a viable option. It should be pursued. Gas investment should be taken much more seriously. And I think it will be a very good alternative, or a very good addition, not alternative, a good addition to the country's oil revenue and even non-oil revenue portfolio right now.
It's true, because when some countries are already having charging points, people charge vehicles and all of that, people are already looking away. I know we still have a lot to do around that in this part of the world. But let me ask you again, that in a totally deregulated market, there won't be price fixing.
Yes, I was expecting that question. So the NNPC released a list of prices across the states, statistics and FCT, statistics and FCT regarding their pump prices. Now, a lot of people have looked at that and seen it as price fixing, which I don't, like I said, I'll be as balanced and objective as I can. I don't see it that way. The authority, in terms of the NNDPRA, if there should be any form of guidance regarding the general price levels, they are the ones responsible for that. If they intend to provide any form of price guidance, they might eventually do that, but in the coming days or in the coming weeks as we proceed. What the NNPC has done is, if you look at their press statement, was directed at the NNPC filling stations. All right, it was directed at NNPC petrol stations across the country. So they have pegged prices based on, and if you look at it, Lagos is the cheapest, and I think Borno is the higher. There's a 17 naira window between both states. So that tells you that the terms of logistics and distance have been taken into consideration in fixing those prices. However, I believe what the NNPC can do further to help us is to perhaps provide a breakdown of how they arrived at that those prices. They are still a state-owned enterprise. They still owe the country a level of transparency. Perhaps let us know what the landing cost is and how the distribution costs were factored in as it applies to the different states, or at least the different regions. It will help us to understand the price. And why I say that is because these prices are subject to fluctuations, right? Right now, the price of crude oil is somewhere around $70 per barrel. If it by this time last year, it was somewhere around $120 per barrel. If it increases again to above $100 per barrel, you don't understand that the end price, the pump price, will change. If there are also issues in Europe where we import petroleum from, in terms of their downstream sector, that affects prices either upwards or downwards, we are also going to feel it right here in Nigeria. And because as the subsidy has gone, we don't have any cushion effect or shock absorbers for that. So what I think the NFCC can do, help us to understand how you arrive at that breakdown. And then it will also help us to understand what other marketers are doing in placing their prices. If we go around Lagos today, even as NPC has pegged their price at 488, not all petrol stations are selling at that price. So they are not bound to comply with the NNPC's prices. NNPC is another commercial entity. The authority in terms of the NDPRA is the institution that has the mandate to either provide any price guidance or cap if they should choose to, because like you said, it's the regulated economy. There's no room for price fixing. But however, that doesn't mean that you should leave the consumers to the whims and caprices of oil marketers. You never can tell what will happen. There should be some form of regulation and guidance regarding how the downstream market proceeds further.
Interesting stuff. Now, before I let you go, let me ask you my final question regards to this topic of discourse. Now, the PIA is also supposed to open up that market and attract the needed investments for us to, or at least to make more money from the oil and gas industry. But with all of this that we see, some might say a little bit of uncertainty. Investors don't always like to see that. What sort of investment are you expecting in Nigeria's oil and gas industry moving on, maybe in short term, medium term, and long term?
Okay, this is a very broad question because we have investments in the upstream, which has to do with production, and we also have investments in the downstream, which has to do with refining and distribution. So depends on the segment you are looking at. Excuse me. Depending on the segment you are looking at. With the PIA, it is expected that we'll be able to attract more investments in oil and gas exploration. However, the legislation is not the only factor to consider. You have to also look at the affinity for investors to invest more in oil and gas projects in a climate that is trying to move away from fossil fuels. I'm not saying that there will be no investments. There will be investments. In fact, Africa is one of the regions that is projected to increase in fossil fuel, in fact, crude oil consumption between now and 2050. So if in terms of the market outlook in Africa, there is room for that. However, it has to do, the investors have to be let's say incentivized enough to be able to put their money down in the upstream sector. These are not small projects. These are projects that will require years to achieve payout. The same thing with investments in the downstream sector. The Dangote refinery cost at almost $20 billion to build. It's one of the largest refineries in the world, right? If you're looking for similar investments, the climate has to be conducive enough for them to invest and get their returns in a time frame where that commodity is still relevant and profitable. And those are the things that we have to consider in attracting investment. I think there's still room for investment. I think the country is poised to receive additional investment in the sector as long as we are able to ensure that the environment is suitable. We have to ensure that security is handled properly so that investments are protected, logistics are protected, business environment is better than what we have today. It will play a long role in attracting investments. Also, we also need to ensure that the volatility in consumer, consumer spending is also protected. Why I say that is because of the hike in energy and transport prices now, there is less disposable income. So the government can perhaps explore some form of measures to lessen the burden on the consumers and allow them have more disposable income. I don't know how much time you have.
Thank you. So allow me to interject. All I think you've made You made my day there. Nice point there. Thank you so much for your insight. I must thank you, Mr. Enebi Okpaluwa. He's a senior research and policy analyst at Budget. And thanks so much for the figures there, for all of the clarity in understanding what's been spent on subsidy, what can be done, and all of that. Well, we'll keep a tab. It's a running story, so definitely we'll still have you talk around this some other time. Do enjoy the rest of your day.